Okay. Number 6, this is a very, very important one, because I'm sure we can all think of times when we do this ourselves, because everybody does this. And this is that once people have made up their mind, most people would rather commit to being wrong rather than admit they were wrong. This is a huge problem in society. It's a huge problem that can happen with any individual. And this is that we all like to be right. We all want to be right, and sometimes we are not. Sometimes we are wrong, and we have a conversation with someone, or we get some new information, or see some statistics, or get some facts or some data, and it proves that we are incorrect. And because we all have an ego, and we all have a mad level of self-esteem and pride, it can be difficult to be wrong. If you're having an argument with someone and they have a better point than you, it's often the tendency that we want to deny it, or we want to lash out, and that's not the right way to go. If you want to become not just a smart person, but someone who gains wisdom over time, and every day and every week and every year is becoming more and more smart, you have to be willing to accept when you are wrong, and you always have to be open to taking on new information, even if it's from someone it's especially hard when it's from someone you don't really like, who gives you that new information. You naturally want to reject it. But if you think that every single thing that you know in your life thus far, everything that you're aware of, you actually knew it because initially either you were wrong or you just didn't know. And there's nothing wrong with not knowing something. Most of us don't know very much about most things. It doesn't matter how old you are. There's all these subjects that we don't know about. So the key takeaway here is that when you are incorrect about something and you get new information, you have to have the humility to take it on board. Don't reject it. It's much better to be proven wrong, and perhaps for a very short time you may feel, depending on what it is, you might feel a little bit ashamed, or you might feel a little bit silly, but it's much better to acknowledge it and have that humility and say, oh, okay, I was wrong, than to continue to be wrong and continue to make the same mistake and to keep on going through that, because it can be, I can think of many high-scale examples of this when an error is made early on, and instead of course correcting when you get new information. Here's a good analogy. It would be like if you were driving or you were traveling somewhere and you think that you're supposed to go in that direction, but really you're supposed to go that way, but you've started going this way already, and you keep on going. I mean, it would be crazy. You look at your map and you can see you're going further and further and further away from where you're supposed to be going. So when you get that information, instead of carrying on just because you've already started, it's better to change course and go in the correct direction. Point number 7, this is a good thing to know about all of us, which is that people can be trained and conditioned quickly to significantly alter their behaviors for better or for worse. Now, we are all creatures of habit. The things that you do on any given day tend to be very similar to what you did the day before, which also tend to be very similar to what you're going to do the next day and the next day and the next day. We form habits, and we typically operate in these types of loops with some small variations. Now, this is not something that's either positive nor negative. It's something that can be used in both ways. I'm sure you all know about having bad habits and having good habits, right? So a bad habit could be something that's bad for your health, or it's bad for other people, for example, and a good habit is the opposite. It's something that's positive for you and or positive for society. So you can use the fact that we form habits and the fact that we can adapt to things quickly. You can use that to your own benefit. So rather than falling into negative patterns and bad habits, you can break that and you can create good habits. And if you, there's a quote which is that people are the sum of their habits. And if you look at where people are, especially over the long course of time, that's largely based on the habits that they formed, because people can get into a positive pattern which leads to success, or you can get into a negative pattern which ultimately can lead to destruction, because you just keep repeating things that are bad, and they compound and they add up, and that can lead to someone's life being in ruin. So use the fact that this exists to form positive habits rather than negative ones if you want to be successful. Point number 8, I touched on this one earlier, and this is that when people are sufficiently frightened, most will not only accept authoritarianism, but they will demand it. Now, I don't know all the details of everything you guys have been through in the past couple of years. You'll have all sorts of different opinions on it. But one thing I'm sure is that you'll all be able to understand what is meant by this. So when there is something that is frightening to people, when people get scared, when there's a potential threat, as we talked about before, people look for some type of leadership. People look to be commanded. Most people look to be, they don't want to make the decision for themselves because there's something out there and it's scary, and they want to be told what to do. Now, again, if you're not careful, in an extreme case, this can lead to massive loss of liberty, and it can lead to loss of freedom, because people decide that because there is a threat, you have to not just control yourself, but you have to control other people, that everybody else needs to be controlled and needs to act and behave in a very, very specific way, whether they want to or not, because there is a potential threat. And so it's very important, especially like during normal time, this isn't something you have to worry about so much. But when there is a threat, when there is an elevated level of fear, this is something to always be aware of, because you can feel that tendency to want to force other people to do things. You might feel that within yourself, or you may see other people trying to do it and trying to force everyone into a certain way of doing things. And that's not the way that a society should be, especially in the long term. That's how you end up with some type of tyranny or some type of dictatorship where you no longer have any individual freedom and you are forced to behave in a very, very set way, which prevents you from living a free life as you should be able to. Point number 9, which is that a lot of people who are dismissed as conspiracy theorists are often well-researched and ahead of the mainstream narrative. Now, conspiracy theorist is a funny term because it's one of those things that does have a proper and a true meaning, but oftentimes it is a label. I think it's a good time to talk about labels, because oftentimes labels and particularly insults are used to shut down conversation. They're used to shut down dissent. They're used to dissuade people from doing their own individual thinking. Now, this is not it's not a fair tactic, but it's an effective tactic that many people can use on many different issues. So the key point here isn't so much on this label, but it's understanding that when people don't want to have a discussion, or when they want to shy away from a debate, or when they don't want to be challenged or questioned, a way that they can often avoid it on a small scale or on a large scale is by calling people names. And conspiracy theorist is one of those, but oftentimes, as it says there, people who get labeled with that are people who are simply thinking independently and thinking logically. And as you said before, answering your question when you were asking about people who you should follow, as I said, it's good to listen to different perspectives and see, does something make sense, or is it backed up by some type of evidence or some type of reason or some type of thinking and so on. And if someone is able to explain what they're saying and back it up with some type of evidence, then that's something that gives it more credibility, not simply what they may be labeled or not be labeled. So that's a key point there. Point number 10 is that people generally value safety and security, or the feeling of it, more than they value liberty and freedom. Now, this is a difficult point because in Western countries, in places such as Australia, the UK, USA, Canada, and so on, Western Europe, countries that are generally considered free and democratic, we are often told, and the general belief is that freedom, liberty, individual rights are the pinnacle of what we strive for as a society. And again, in peacetime, that generally does seem to be true. However, once again, if a threat is introduced, then the one thing that I've found, this is an observation I've really made and understood in the past couple of years, is the one thing, or the couple things that a rational, sane person will trade, at least temporarily, for liberty and freedom is safety and security. Again, this is not something that is inherently bad. It's understandable. If there's a real threat out there, if there's something that could cause a threat to yourself or your family or your community, then it's pretty natural, if you think about it, that the desire for safety or security would supersede a temporary desire to generally be free and to be able to do what you want, because we care about survival. What good is freedom if you're not alive to enjoy it and to experience it, or if you're horribly crippled or something like that? So again, on a short term, this isn't something that's inherently bad, but on a long term, it's something that can really cause a problem. Because if you do want to live in a free society, and if you do want to have individual rights and civil liberties, then that is something that you have to not just value, but you have to maintain, and you have to be vigilant about potential threats to it. Because when certain types of authoritarianism or even tyranny comes, it rarely comes under the banner of just tyranny, right? It's not going to come under the banner of, oh, okay, I just want to be mean and force people to do this or force people to do that. It's going to come under the banner of some type of greater good, or some type of safety, or some type of security, so that you will give up your individual rights and liberties so that you can feel safe. The danger is that oftentimes if you give that up, it can be extraordinarily difficult to get it back, as I'm sure you yourselves have seen and experienced firsthand over the last few years. So rather than something lasting for 2 weeks, like it was supposed to, for example, it can go on and last for 2 months and then 2 years, and it can keep going and going and going. And I think that that's something billions of people around the world have really been through. Okay, that is point number 10. So I'm going to take another pause. And if anyone has if any of you guys have any questions, comments.
So people that label other people as conspiracy theorists are just people that have the fear of the truth?
Good question. Very good question. Oftentimes, yes. Oftentimes, yes. I mean, the thing with this term conspiracy theory is it's extraordinarily broad. It can be used from people who think that the world is flat and that is run by lizards to people who simply question certain governmental actions or things that may be going on with what's happening in the world. So it's very much a sliding scale. So it's not as simple as anyone who is deemed a conspiracy theorist is always telling the truth, but sometimes someone can be saying something which is rooted in facts, it's logical, it makes sense, it's understandable, they have some data or sources for what they're saying. And in those type of situations, it's much more credible that person's view is much more likely to be credible. But conspiracy theorist can be, as you said, it can be used as just a very lazy label, so that every time someone says something that sounds a bit odd or is not totally in line with what you're hearing in the news, for example, they have a different perspective, and you just say that they're a conspiracy theorist, and you're automatically putting them with people who might believe really, really crazy things, and it means that you then it creates the idea that you don't need to listen to that person, but it's too closed-minded. I would even say when someone has an idea which might even sound crazy, number one, of course, they should be allowed to speak. Everyone should be allowed to speak their mind. But oftentimes, I mean, if someone is saying something that's completely crazy, the best way to deal with that, in my opinion, is to listen to them and then ask questions and to respond, right? If someone is telling you that the Earth is indeed flat, despite all the evidence and the fact that you can go up in space and look at it and see that it's round, it's not a particularly difficult thing to debunk in that case. Yeah.
What do you think the future will look like when our generation and future generations are in power?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And honestly, I feel like that's a question I should be asking you guys. The honest answer is I think that it's up to you collectively, not just you as an individual, but I believe it's up to each generation to decide that. With every generation comes new ideas and different ways of thinking and ways of looking at the world and ways of interacting with each other. And so I think it's extremely hard for me to say. I'm someone who's naturally optimistic. I believe that over the long course of time, human beings and our societies generally tend to get better. I think that's quite obviously true. But oftentimes there are periods of decline where things can regress temporarily. For example, I think it would be fair to say, no matter where you live, I think it's fair to say that 2018 was better than 2020 and 2021, right? And there has been a regression, and we now need to get back to where we were and then go beyond it. But ultimately, I'm optimistic. You guys give me a lot of hope because I talk to people of all ages, and there's still a lot of wisdom in the world, and there's a lot of critical thinking, and there's most people are decent, and most people are generally more good than they are bad. I think the reason why I really wanted to talk about this today is so that we all understand that even though most people are decent, even decent people are prone to bad ways of thinking and are prone to potential negative behaviors, especially when that's happening, when fear is introduced or when something is happening on a large level and people are no longer thinking clearly because they're acting very, very emotionally. I got here and I was like, it's the same as the UK. I went 10,000 miles and the weather's the same.
I promise you.
Thank you so much.